inmates, report to your cells effective immediately. Bumblebee is going into lockdown. Rest assured, however, because we've got a video on the top 10 scary prisons that will give you nightmares to entertain you while we get this prison riot under control. Alright, to start is the comfy, cuddly, and cute getaway, Devil's Island. Devil's Island was perhaps the most feared and horrific penal colony in the history of incarceration. Made famous in Henry Charrier's Papillon, it was built under the orders of the government of Emperor Napoleon III in 1852 in Ile de Salut, a trio of islands. Doing what colonizers do best, which is put the unwanted people on boats or steal their land or do both, 80,000 of France's worst criminals were packed up from the rich and pompous Europe and sent to Devil's Island in South America. Many of them died of disease, starvation, and absolute brutality during the time in prison. Those who did manage to complete their sentences were still banished from France and forced to stay on the island for literally the rest of their lives. No economy, no home, no job, essentially like being dropped in a Minecraft map for the first time, and all they knew before this life was crime? Yeah, I don't gotta tell you what the island was like even once you got out of jail. I feel it paints its own picture. And what better to follow Devil's Island rather than Fiery Furnace? Hoi Loa Prison was a famous prison located in Hanoi's French district that received great notoriety because of its use by the French colonial government and later North Vietnamese fighters during the Vietnam War. It's been described as a bare-knuckles recreation of destitution. Built in stages between 1886 and 1901 in downtown Hanoi by the French, Hoi Lo Prison, translated as Fiery Furnace, was a place of incomprehensible brutality. Prisoners were shackled by one leg, left unable to walk or sometimes stand up. Many are kept in tiny, damp, dark, and filthy solitary confinement cells and subjected to arbitrary physical and mental violence. Not to mention the basic horrific torment and deprivation of basic human rights. Nicknamed the Hanoi Hilton during the Vietnam War, some 600 US prisoners were kept at the Hoi Lo between August of 1964 and 73, including future Republican president nominee John McCain. Lot of lockups on islands, oftentimes in weirdly beautiful areas. This one is Robben Island off the coast of Cape Town in South Africa, is a notorious prison best known for its internment, but also the killing and torment of its political prisoners during South Africa's apartheid, such as not one but 3 of their former South African presidents, Motlothane, Jacob Zuma, and for 18 of his 27 years of incarceration, Nelson Mandela. Called the Alcatraz of South Africa, inmates endured regular beatings and extreme torment at the hands of sadistic guards who went largely unchecked. Inmates weren't given shoes or sufficient clothing. Many are forced every day to do hard labor in a limestone quarry under the glare of the searing African sun. At night they slept on a stone floor of their tiny cells or on rickety spring beds in larger overcrowded rooms. But those hardships all paled in comparison with solitary confinement, the punishment inmates feared most. It didn't take much to end up there, being caught reading a newspaper or political literature, singing songs about freedom, organizing a card game, or working too slowly, just some of the punishable offenses. Prison guards would cut out sentences or paragraphs from letters addressed to inmates from loved ones before even delivering them to their cells. These were referred to as window letters. The only time prisoners were given their letters in full was when they received bad news, such as a death in the family, because they knew that was going to hurt them. Over in India, we hit the black water. Kalala Pani, or black water, essentially meant cruel treatment until death or money back guarantee, as it was agreed upon by many that a sentence there was worse than that of actual death. Each inmate was provided with 2 metal bowls. One was meant for food and the other was your toilet you could only clean out the next morning. There were no lights and no reading materials in the jail cells, which were widely overcrowded, making the whole 2-bowl thing a bit of a disaster. The drinking water provided was often worm infested, and your meal was boiled rice churned in water once a day with boiled wild grass instead of vegetables. Other than isolation, the work quotas given to these prisoners were frequently impossible to complete within the time limit, and dire punishment followed for those who failed to meet them, ranging from extra hours on the grinding mill to standing handcuffed for a week, to confinement in solitary cells or 4 days of starvation diet and crossbar fetters for 10 days. The prisoners were also kept locked up in bar fetters on a daily, which are heavy metal rods that ran from the elbows to the knees to limit the prisoner's motion. The only time fetters are unlocked was for work purposes, and a crossbar fetter, as mentioned, are the rods that are kept between the feet to keep the legs wide open as a form of punishment, and they can now be found in the Love Shop. Now for what's called the Bangkok Hilton. This joking nickname comes from the fact the prison is severely overcrowded, underfunded, and outdated. So yeah, I can get that. Max security houses both foreigners and nationals, with a population of 8,000 despite being built for half of that. Shackles are a form form of classification. New prisoners are required to wear them for the first 3 months. New in prison with no range of motion and no way to protect yourself, yeah, that gets your spirit broken really quick. Death row inmates also wear shackles, but those ones are welded on. Only one meal, a bowl of rice and soup, is served each day. Other food must be purchased through the canteen, so any poor prisoners have to work or sell themselves to wealthier prisoners to afford it. In the case of Angela Cargini, she was an American who spent 9 years in Bangkwang for smuggling. The only meal she ever had was infested with maggots. Thanks to the lack of running water and the terrible sewage system which sends toxic fumes in the prison, prisoners have a myriad of health issues, only exacerbated by overcrowding. Perhaps the scariest aspect is how easy it is to end up in here for decades, even for a non-severe crime. Jonathan Wheeler was sentenced for smuggling for 50 years. Meanwhile, a local was arrested for killing and chopping up his wife and released after only 11. Not all jails and prisons had real criminals inside. For some, there's simply a door of no return. Elmina Castle was built by the Portuguese in 1482 as a trade settlement on the former Gold Coast, now modern-day Ghana, and it remains the oldest European building south of the Sahara Desert. In 1637, the Dutch-African labor trade started, and it's estimated that over 30,000 African men and women passed through Elmina Castle, suffering the most horrific, humiliating, and depraved conditions imaginable. Up to 1,500 men and women at the time would be kept shackled in the castle dungeon. Uncomfortably cramped, filthy, and food was scarce, and outbreaks of malaria and yellow fever were everywhere. Revolts at Elmina were met with strong oppression. Some captives were either killed outright, while others were placed in the airtight dark holding facility in the courtyard where they would starve to death. Many were chained outside to cook under the sun, or made to repeatedly lift heavy cannonballs until they gave out, and the women were frequently violated by the guards. At the seaboard side of the castle, the infamous Door of No Return, which was a portal where captured Africans boarded ships that would take them on the treacherous journey across the Atlantic sat. The castle was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1972. Back over in America, we visit the notorious celebrity lockup. Rikers, you've heard of this notorious New York jail. Harvey Weinstein spent the first few months behind bars here, and celebs Sid Vicious, DMX, Lil Wayne, and Foxy Brown all served here. But maybe you know it from Mayor Bill de Blasio's statement where he vowed in 2017 to close it down within a decade. Rikers Island has a notorious record of systematic violence. Perhaps more feared than the gangs are the correctional officers, and rightfully so. 11 lawsuits have been filed against them, and in 2015 federal prosecutors concluded the guards routinely torment their inmates at the jail, and that during an 11-month period in 2013, 129 had sustained serious injuries at the hands of guards. Johnny Perez described the prison as the worst out of the 9 he'd been incarcerated in across New York. In Rikers, the officers give you a knife. They'll sell you a razor. I bought substances from the officers who would turn around and told me they're gonna put me in solitary. My mother doesn't meet them to pay them in the parking lot. In 2015, 19 prisoners sued Rikers authorities over claims they were made sick by a meatloaf containing rat poison. Even after the lab confirmed rodenticide was found in the food, the case was dismissed. Khalif Browder was just 16 years old when he was arrested for second-degree robbery. He was unable to make his $3,500 bail, but maintained innocence and awaited 3 years for trial at Rikers. And in those 3 years, he was victimized by both correctional officers and fellow inmates before his case is dismissed and he's released. To reiterate, 3 years of SA and mental anguish waiting for a case that's dismissed. In June of 2015, he took his own life, and the press coverage around the case became a catalyst for the proposed reform of New York City's criminal justice system. Nothing is worse than a clogged drain, especially in prison. Feels like a very bad sign. And it was! Welcome to La Modelo, a Colombian prison contending for the title of Central America's worst prison, where a truly gruesome discovery was made 7 years ago. Clogging up the drains of the jail in capital city Bogota were the body parts of over 100 people. The true number of the victims is unknown, but it's made up of prisoners, visitors, and others. Inmates claim there's no running water and they're forced to use a hole in the ground as a toilet, which also doubles up as their shower and sink for washing dishes. One prisoner claimed his bed was ridden with ticks and ants. Tempers run high inside La Modelo, where left-wing rebels and right-wing paramilitaries vie for power amid squalid conditions, and they're literally not separated. With space at a premium, the prisoners share 15 by 15 cells with 8 other men, escaping it for only a couple hours of exercise a week. Amid the pandemic in 2020, prisoners protested the filthy conditions and were attacked by guards. 23 prisoners were killed just days before the 20th anniversary of an accord between the US government and Colombia to reform and improve Colombia's prison system. I feel these next 2 points are a tie. It was hard to pick which went first. We're starting with Tadmur, the worst prison in the world. The building has windows wrapped in barbed wire for its ceilings, allowing guards to look down downwards and keep inmates under constant surveillance. Not that a prisoner could check if anyone is up there. Eye contact or even raising your head was forbidden in Tadmor. We used to distinguish guards from the color of their boots as we never saw their faces, wrote one Syrian writer. The mass killings that took place within Tadmor's walls in 1980 is ingrained in Syria's consciousness. A day after the failed attempt on Hafez al-Assad's life, members of the infamous defense brigades, headed by Assad's brother, went from cell to cell, killing between 500 and 1,000 political prisoners within minutes. It said their bodies are dumped into a mass grave just outside. Former inmates often talk about the first hours at Tadmor and the so-called reception parties done, where wardens pulled them off the bus, whipping them repeatedly until they were all out. Then military police searched their clothes, and one by one they were put into a car tire. Each person had the bottom of their feet beat 200 to 400 times. Everyone's left in bad conditions, legs bleeding and covered in wounds, and other parts of their bodies as well. Some prisoners apparently died during this party. And now for the other in my tie, locked lips. Described as the gateway to the fifth circle of hell by the former Venezuelan president Hugo Chavez, La Sabanita lives up to its grim reputation. According to Venezuelan Prison Observatory, 80% of Venezuelan prisons are actually run by armed inmates. A dark reality that has left La Sabanita with one guard for every 150 inmates. Built for only 700 residents, it now houses 3,700. Like most jails in Venezuela, gangs practically run inside life, organizing protection rackets that force vulnerable low-status inmates to pay them just so they can sleep. The filthy conditions means prisoners have to bathe from the same buckets as water, or go to the toilet in plastic bags that they toss out windows. Our list of residents, known as the unwanted ones, have taken to adhering to the prison code that says when one sews his lips, no one can kill him, by literally stitching their mouths shut for protection, using whatever sharp items and thread they can find. As a result of such abhorrent, well, everything, riots have broken out time and time again in this prison's blood-stained history. In 1994, 108 prisoners were killed in a riot, and in 2013, 16 inmates were killed during a riot. The perpetual war between rival gangs has led to the beheading and gruesome dismemberment of several victims inside the prison, and follow-up raids find stockpiles of weapons and grenades and even endangered animals inside prison walls, which belong to the leader of prison hierarchy. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe to see more, and until next time, everyone follow the rules.